Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to today's second panel discussion as part of our public lecture series on China's rise and the restructuring of the global order. The purpose of this series is to make a contribution to a fact-based and multi-perspective view on the challenges of our times. Following China's rise to power and in the context of our recent multiple crises, public discourse in China has become dangerously one-sided, more often than not driven by ideological conviction rather than based on factual knowledge about this complex, bewildering, yet also fascinating and stimulating country. To counter this dangerously distorted perception of China in our public discourse, we set out to organize a series of panel discussions, the first of which last July addressed the consequences of China's rise for the international order. The aim is neither to defend nor to criticize China, but to make a contribution to an assessment of important issues based on factual first-hand knowledge. With this aim in mind, it is essential for us to combine a broad range of different perspectives, which is why we always invite experts from academia, politics, the media, and depending on topic, also the corporate life. Today's choice of topic is motivated by the widespread portrayal of China's President Xi Jinping as a dictator, surrounding himself with a personality cult reminiscent of the times of Mao Zedong. Not that this portrayal is entirely wrong, but it is oversimplified and does not address essential questions that need to be asked. To come to a better understanding, a better assessment of Xi and the question of the scope and nature of his power, we have invited three well-known experts who have made a name for themselves as being factual and calm in their approach to China. Johnny Erling, who studied in China in the mid-70s and early 80s, and has been reporting from China for various daily newspapers, including Die Welt, for a period of over 35 years, is now a senior research fellow at MERIX, the Mercator Institute for China Studies. Today, he will share with us his experience as a journalist in China and his perspective as a senior member of the media community. Joseph Fewsmith, on the left side from your perspective, professor of international relations and political science at the Boston University Pardee School and associate of the John King Fairbanks Center for China Studies at Harvard University, is a well-known expert on Chinese domestic politics and foreign policy. He is taking on a long journey, arriving here yesterday, to join us here today, contributing his academic research expertise to our discussions. Jürgen Trittin, a leading member of the Green Party since the early 1980s, served for more than 40 years as a member of parliament in Lower Saxony and the Bundestag. He served as a federal minister of environment, nature conservation and nuclear safety until 2005, and has been a central figure in the Green Party for foreign policy, with long-term intensive contacts in China. Today he joins us as moderator of the panel discussion. Without any further delay, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Axel, dear Joseph, and dear Johnny. Because we have something in common. You could absolve this discussion also in Chinese as a consideration. To me, we do it in English. Xi Jinping and the question of power is the subject today, and we hope that at the end we know who really rules China. Axel was so kind to introduce you both, so we can jump directly into discussion. We'll start with, I'm serious on that, 5 minutes inputs that should answer my first question. This first question is a simple and complicated one. What is the political system in China today? I ask this because there have been significant changes in the last 20 years. I can describe it from my own experiences. At the beginning of the century, as a German Minister for Environment, I started the cooperation with China in the fields of climate policy and energy, especially renewable energy. China became a partner of Germany. by the way, with interesting results. At that time, no, it's better. At that time, the Communist Party of China was skeptic and hostile to renewable energies. We did the second Global Renewable Energy Conference in Beijing, including the active participation of NGOs like Greenpeace. Today, Greenpeace on Tiananmen is unthinkable. But at the end, we convinced China with a geostrategic argument. Renewables make more independent from energy imports. Today, China is the biggest investor in renewables, and thanks to a German conservative liberal government, it has a global monopoly on the production of solar panels. The China of the early 2000s was not democratic. It was an authoritarian but fragmented political system. China today is still authoritarian, but the power is less fragmented. Some analysts use the word of a totalitarian system. Today, Europe and Germany see China in their strategies as partner, competitor, and systemic rival. Partner is obvious. Competitor, fair, unfair. We discussed a lot of that. But what is the core? This is my question. What is the core of the system of this rival? First, you have the floor, Joseph.
Yes? Yeah, okay. Good. Well, as you know, you asked a very complicated question. And so I thought I would try to take a long-range look at it, and I'll try within 5 minutes to get back to your question. Two dates that I'm sure you all know. May 4th, June 4th. This is how one of my good friends, Rod McFarquhar, started a speech at the party school in Beijing, making lots of his friends scurry upstairs to say, we didn't know he was going to do that. But I'm not going to follow with what Rod McFarquhar said, but I think the two dates are really interesting because they give you a range of Chinese behavior. May 4th movement was, of course, of that seminal explosion of popular passion, political change, of creativity, talking about democracy. This is when the women's rights movement was started in China. Just wonderful, and of course everybody at the time thought, this is wonderful. China will soon be like the United States, or perhaps Europe. Americans always look at it from a very ethnocentric perspective. And then, of course, June 4th, you all know, 36 years ago, all those hopes were really, the state is back, and back in force, and all the hopes about innovation, democratization, whatever you want to call it, are crushed. The reason that I bring this up, a couple reasons. One, oh, by the way, the reaction to June 4th, at least in the States, and I think a lot of Europe, was that the Chinese Communist Party is not going to be around for very long. It's going to crash and burn. And so the reason for bringing these two dates up is it proves that analysts of China, at least the academic ones and maybe sometimes the official ones, are not very good. We've missed prediction after prediction after prediction. And the lesson I think one can draw from contrasting these two dates is that China, first of all, it's when the state is strong, the society is weak. And when the society is strong, the state is weak. And China hasn't been able to reconcile a strong state that can cooperate with and nurture a strong society at the same time. And that has provided for a lot of drama that we've seen over the past 100 years. The reason for this, besides, well, revolution and war are never good for institution building, but aside from those details, China really has not worked very assiduously to build strong institutions. You see institutions, for instance, who's going to succeed Xi Jinping? We don't know. Who's going to select the successor to Xi Jinping? We don't know. So not only do we not know, the Politburo does not know. So when you ask what type of system China is today, it's still, at this point, a rather uninstitutionalized system, despite the fact that it has institutional mechanisms in it. So, you know, I think this was demonstrated, just a couple of years ago when Xi Jinping said, well, I think I'll stay on for a third term, which probably means that he'll stay on for a fourth term. We don't know that yet. It could be either way. In other words, it can be a very strong system if you look at it from particular angles, such as policies to do this or that sort of thing. It can be very powerful. Obviously, on state security issues like that, extremely powerful. But you know, on the bigger questions, the macro questions, including its orientation to the United States, its orientation to Europe and Germany, these are all things that can be decided only at the very top of the system. And so you can get this fluctuation back and forth. I don't want to say at the whim of the leader, but close to that. A very small group of people deciding very important issues. So where it's going to go, I will not predict that. I will let Johnny do that.
Does this work? No? Yes, does it work? Okay, great. So I'm very happy to talk to you today. Even if the microphone is working, it's even better. And I have the question that Jürgen put to us is a very complicated question, because on the first side it doesn't look not complicated. China was per se the People's Republic of China, from the founding of the People's Republic of China, a dictatorship. They said it especially in their constitution. They call it a people's dictatorship, a people's democratic dictatorship, sometimes like this, sometimes like that. The problem is what we are talking about is Xi Jinping and power. And the problem is that this dictatorship has been changed by Xi Jinping to an absolute Xi Jinping dictatorship. And that is what I think is the big difference. Now, what does it mean with that? I had the chance to be in China for quite a long time and taking all these developments and all these changements with me. For example, I have been more than 20 times being a guest of this, of the parliament, of the Chinese parliament, which is called the People's Congress. Now, every year you saw this People's Congress going on, and we as journalists could take part and looked what's happening. So what has happened in the last 10 years since Xi Jinping is in power, especially since 2012, that makes it 13 years. And he has changed this system slowly but completely, and I don't agree totally with what Joseph just said. He said that China has no strong institutions. China has some strong institutions, and Xi Jinping's work was to get these strong institutions to become weak. He weakened all these institutions which were not in favor of him to become in favor of him. So the last thing which I actually saw in the moment is just 2 days old. You have heard about it. 2 days ago, the People's Congress just terminated or finished his session. And in this session, there was another, and I would say one of the last big changements that Xi Jinping has managed to put into effect. The delegates, the 2,900 delegates which are elected in a certain way, have a new constitution. They have changed their statutes. And how did they change them? The new amendment is just 1 or 2 sentences. It just says that Xi Jinping is the heart of everything, is the core of the leadership. Secondly, Xi Jinping's ideology is our ideology. So these are the delegates which are called the most important, theoretically, the most important power in the state. No, the most important power in the state, theoretically, is just called Mr. Xi. And he has done that since 2012, very needlessly. Every year, every second year, he changed things. He changed 2 times the constitution. He changed 2 times the party statutes. So if the institutions are not strong, why did he change them? He changed them for him, for his own possibility to govern. So one of the constitution changements was to change the term that a state president can only stay for 2 terms. That means 10 years. So he changed that. He just get it out. He didn't say, I want to govern all my life or I want to govern longer. He just said, it's not more necessary to have a law saying he can only stay 2 terms. Now it depends if Mr. Xi wants and is powerful enough to force all the delegates to vote for him for 3rd term. So they did. They gave him 100% 3rd term. And if he is healthy enough, he can have a 4th term, a 5th term, a 6th term. He will never put into the constitution that he can stay as long as he likes, but he stays as long as he likes. And now we could come down to all these things that happened in the last 12 and 13 years. We will find out that the collective leadership which Xi Jinping inherited is becoming a one-man leadership. That has been changed. We can find out where exactly and how did he do it. We know that the separation between the party and the government and the party and everything else that Deng Xiaoping, the predecessor of Xi Jinping, wanted to get away with, wanted to have it, is away now. And there is a lot of these things which just says Xi Jinping is the core of the leadership, Xi Jinping's, and everything does it. So you had a People's Congress, and I finished with that. You had a People's Congress which only took 7 days. At my time, it was 12 days or 13 days. The Premier Minister who gives the first speech in a People's Congress should also give the last press conference. This last press conference, this last press conference is cancelled. There is no more last press conference. And then this time, this great 7 days of People's Congress was from the first day to the last day, with the exception of the speech of the Premier Minister. It was every day, it was Xi Jinping, Xi Jinping, Xi Jinping. But Xi Jinping is not the People's Congress. So he now is not only dictating the People's Congress, he also let the people discuss what is to be discussed, and he has the absolute power in it. And if we want, we can put more examples later, but that only to say about the question, Xi Jinping and the power, and he used it very cleverly, very slowly, in 12 and 13 years to put up now the final thing that everything is just going according to his demands and to his show. So.
Thank you, Johnny. If you talk about the changes within what you call the dictatorship, I have a more historic question. If you describe the rise of Xi Jinping, what would be different if the struggle of power had had another winner? Means Bo Xilai, that was his rival at the beginning of his ruling.
Two short answers on that. First, probably Bo Xilai would have done the same. And I met Bo Xilai two, 3 times, and it is a very interesting guy in Chongqing. We're not going to go into too deeply in Bo Xilai's question, because Bo Xilai is in prison now and he will never come back. But this Xi Jinping has prepared for this 25 years. He was 25 years in 4 provinces, coming up from down to up. And when he came in 2007 to become the vice, a guy of the standing committee, and then the vice president and the party chief, the chief of the party school, then he started his career. And one sentence for that, and then I would just love to give to Joseph. In 2007, it was me as a journalist for a German newspaper and Jimmy Flora Cruz for the CNN. We had a good connection with the foreign ministry, also the party, actually not the foreign ministry, but the group in the party which is responsible for that. They came to us and told us, we tell you there is a small group discussions with 20 and more governors and everything else. We would recommend you to just choose 2 which you take part. One is Xi Jinping. At that time he was the president. He was from Shanghai. He was not the top guy at 2007 before being elected. And the other one is Li Keqiang, who also came from a province. Actually, they wanted to tell us it is already decided that one of these 2 will become the party chief and one of these 2 will become the prime minister. Xi Jinping managed to become the party chief. And at that time, Bo Xilai, and then I come back to Bo Xilai, at that time Bo Xilai was still in the Politburo. He was chosen in the Politburo. So it was not decided. Later on there was this very strange battle between Xi Jinping and Bo Xilai and other people connected, and then Bo Xilai was finished and Xi Jinping made his career, and it took him 5 years to come to the ultimate power. And this is, according to my understanding, something which he knew how to do it, and he made it.
But looking on these battle inside the elites, there is another situation. If you look back at that point as Xi Jinping started, there was a specific problematic situation with the rule of the party at that time. And I found it rather astonishing that 10 years ago, the Pew Center published a study on governance and the acceptance of the government by the people in China, in the US, and in diverse European states. And the result was rather astonishing. The acceptance of the government in China was much higher than in all democratic states. And in the beginning of Xi Jinping, the question of combating corruption, for example, isn't it true that there was a broad acceptance for this starting point of the authoritarian government of Xi Jinping? And why do we in Germany, or you in the US, do not understand this?
Why do we do what?
Why don't we understand this?
we have public opinion polls that are run a little bit differently. No, I do remember that Pew report. It was quite startling, and those questions are real because they're not altogether wrong. Maybe not altogether right, but not altogether wrong. You know, actually, going back to the elite infighting, because I think that that is, I mean, we've seen that in the PRC, and before the PRC was founded, of course, in the communist movement, throughout its history. It's not new, it's repeated. What is new, and perhaps different from most authoritarian systems, is that in China, somebody always wins those fights. They are fought hard, and the loser loses everything. And Bo Xilai can attest to that. You know, what's fascinating about the Bo Xilai case is he knows, he's an old party guy. His father was a really important party guy. They know that you're not supposed to form a small group and criticize directly or indirectly the party or your contender, but he did that. He really was going for blood. And from his perspective, unfortunately, it was his blood that ended up on the floor. It's absolutely amazing. The whole Chongqing model was set up as what the Chinese call a rival show, to put out, he's saying, hey, I can do it better than you can do it. He revived all the red songs of the Cultural Revolution era to say, I'm redder than you are. And, you know, this was really quite an astonishing, almost public display of a contest within the party. One thing that the Chinese Communist Party has been good at doing is limiting the number of contenders. There were, at the time of the 18th Party Congress, there were only 4 people in the whole Central Committee that had the age qualifications to be elected as General Secretary. One had not done anything, so he was clearly not a contender. There was Bo Xilai, there was Li Keqiang, and there was Xi Jinping. So I think that you know, Li Keqiang never had a chance because his backers just were not strong enough. Bo Xilai, just a little bit of infighting. If his father had continued living until that time, I don't know how that fight would have come out. Bo Xilai might very well have been the new General Secretary. You got to pick your date of dying. His was wrong. He died, and as soon as he died, Bo Xilai's star began to fall. So you know, and Bo Xilai thought that he had enough strength among other princelings, among the military, among some other power holders, to really challenge Xi Jinping, and he didn't have it. He fought the good fight, and he lost. This is, you know, the original question is, what type of system is this? That's not a pretty system, is it, where you fight it out that way? There were hopes a few years ago that at least the Central Committee would have a vote. Maybe not even a public vote, but at least a real vote, and choose leaders that way. That would be an institutionalization of the political system. It hasn't happened.
But I want to go back to the so-called normal people, because the narrative of the Chinese Communist Party for a long time was, we have overcome poverty. 800 million people brought out of poverty. We have gross national product per capita that is much higher than Russia. And then, within the period of the rule of Xi Jinping, China was confronted with lower growth rates, with some severe economic crises. I went from Qingdao to Beijing by train. I saw whole cities empty, new buildings totally empty, paid by Chinese people, and then they became victims of the real estate crisis. We know that the banks are heavily indebted in China. The people made the experience of from one day to the other, from 0 COVID to 100% COVID, where people died in the streets because the hospitals were overcrowded. Some Chinese told me, like in India, why is there, Johnny, so not more opposition to that? Because the central narrative is under pressure.
Well, we always said the same thing. We should go in much more details with China to understand what's going on there. But it's really difficult, as Jürgen and you all said it. First, just take what Jürgen just said. So Xi Jinping took over a state, and then the growth rates went down, and so on and so on, and he made a lot of mistakes economically, but still the things work out. Now we have a very complicated situation. We can later on speak about this situation now. But before Xi Jinping, we had Zhu Rongji, a very famous, people have forgotten about him, a very famous prime minister. He was in 1998 in a very desolate situation. Why? Because we had an Asian world crisis. We had an economic crisis, which also was there for getting China in real trouble. What did Zhu Rongji, which of course is very difficult for you because it's a new name and so on, did special? Well, he dared to do reforms. And his reform was getting hundreds of thousands of people out of the job. But he dared to do it, and he fought against corruption. That was always, everyone who comes in power into China, the first thing he does, fight against corruption. But anyway, Zhu Rongji made a lot of good things in China, and actually he prepared the situation that when Wen Jiabao and Hu Jintao came to power, they put up China in a very big economic development. But they also came into a problem with the economic difficulties. And Hu Jintao, when he came to power in 2007, 2008 then was the next big crisis. But Hu Jintao, in the last 5 years before Xi Jinping came to power, in 2007, the last word I still remember, he told in the People's Congress, he said, "We have to fight corruption to the end. That's the most important thing that I have to do." But he was not powerful enough. So now comes Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping's father was also a very prominent guy, like Bo Xilai's father. Xi Jinping had much more power than all these people coming from like Wen Jiabao or the Hu Jintao or all these people. Where did his power come from? First, as I said before, 25 years of preparation, and he knows what to get. He is not that clever, that important, that genius, but he is someone who is really a networker and has a lot of networks. And this thing had helped him. Then the other thing, when Hu Jintao came to power in 2002, he was not the chief of the army. That was at that time called Jiang Zemin guy. He was the chief of the party, but went down because 10 years were over, but kept 2 years his role as a chief of the army. So Hu Jintao had not the army behind him. And the same was with Jiang Zemin when he took over from Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping didn't give him the army. But when Xi Jinping came to power, the moment he was made the chief of the party, the moment he was also made chief of the army. That was the first thing which was different to all the people before him. And how did he become it? That's another story that's maybe too complicated now to put in details. But just to say, he was powerful from the first moment on, and he used his power. And he used his power to get this 12 years of slowly demontating everything which was called primus inter pares, the first under the people who are similar to someone. He was becoming the first and only the first. And how did he do it? In all these things he get over, and all the thing that is important for one emperor, for one very powerful guy. Also, China is so complex that no powerful guy is absolute powerful, but Xi Jinping is nearly absolute powerful. The question, what will happen to that? Last with this thing, if we look to Mr. Xi Jinping's development, then we will see that he, from the first moment on in 2013, he had a program. And if we put on all this important thing in 2013 that he put out, Silk Road, the South China Sea, and, you will see that is the policy of China now and today. So we have to look into this and to understand how someone in this system went over. So his fight against corruption is nothing special, but he had the power to do it. And then his fight against corruption was a fight which helped him to gain more power. Also, up to now, every day, every 2 weeks, I don't know who reads Chinese papers or is interested in China very regularly. Every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, one big guy is falling in China because of corruption. People don't fear corruption in this way as we think they fear. It is just a bad chance. And they have, I think under Xi Jinping you had around 500 high functionaries, high people who were, who were got into prison because of corruption. How is that possible? In Germany, if you would kill or somebody you do with some corrupt guys, a lot of people would be scared. But they are not scared. So why are they not scared? And that's a question that I cannot answer, but we can discuss about it.
But I will go back before you take the floor. What is the new narrative? This is, some people in China say Mao liberated us, Deng made us rich, and Xi Jinping is making us powerful.
Right.
Is that the narrative for getting such a form of acceptance beyond all these economic crises and the problems China is facing?
Well, I think that Xi Jinping or any contemporary leader, Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, whatever, have had trouble with a narrative, what is usually called ideology. There's no Mao Zedong thought. There's no Deng Xiaoping thought. We're supposed to pay attention to the words, the thinking of Xi Jinping, but nobody can tell me what the thought of Xi Jinping is. It's other than to rejuvenate China. I think that this is similar to making America great again. In other words, not very, no great depth there. Xi Jinping, of course, as Johnny just said, is fighting corruption. According to my students, he's not been very successful. I can't prove this, but I can look at some of the cars outside of the business school at BU, and those aren't owned by the professors. At any case, coming back to corruption, you mentioned that Wen Jiabao was determined to fight corruption to the end. He couldn't get it out the front door. Xi Jinping, Desmond Schrum wrote a wonderful book that I'm sure you've read, Red Roulette, and he and his wife are traveling all over the world with Wen Jiabao's wife, engaged in the most conspicuous spending of corrupt goods, buying of things. She was known for taking her cut of every diamond that came into China. he may have wanted to clean up China, but I think this goes back to Confucianism. You're supposed to clean up your household after, and then in concentric circles throughout the world. So corruption remains, I think, a very serious problem. And I would go back to the institutionalization problem. You know, this is something the famous German sociologist Max Weber talked about 100 years ago. You know, he was really thinking about institutions and creating bureaucracies. And, you know, I know there are a lot of bureaucracies in China. Some of them work very well, many of them don't. And this question of building bureaucracies and institutions is an important one for comparative study. So maybe I'll stop there.
No, when I can, I just add two things. First, I didn't say Wen Xiaobao, it was mainly Zhu Rongqi and then Hu Jintao, who called corruption. The real guy fighting corruption was Zhu Rongqi, and Hu Jintao had no possibility. And Wen Xiaobao was very weak because he has not the party and the military behind him. So that's a complicated thing. But the other thing, when I just, what was just the last sentence, and please you, when we just, Jürgen just said how difficult the situation now is in economically and other things, and whereas not the situation difficult in Germany or in America or where else. But anyway, in China, it's also very difficult in the moment, economically and with work and everything. So Xi Jinping has to make some compromises. You'll find them always in the language. When we just said Deng Xiaoping, Mao Zedong made China stand up. Deng Xiaoping made China rich. Xi Jinping made China strong. This is the so-called slogan. And inside that slogan, we always said, so because Xi Jinping is a communist nationalist, a Chinese nationalist, that's a lot of people agree to that. So Xi Jinping also wants to make the socialism and communism, that he wants to distribute the wealth. So now he always said we have to have a common prosperity. But now he doesn't say that anymore. He said now the last time in this talk, he said in Beijing just last week, we have first to become rich and then we make commonwealths. Because the reality now is that Deng Xiaoping was right. Give the initiative to Chinese people that some become first rich and then you can distribute. But first to have this impetus. If not, the thing is not working. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Just as you were talking about corruption and so forth, there's a wonderful story that in 1998, China had terrible corruption, and they were importing a lot of oil, but they were importing a lot of the oil illegally. That's called smuggling. Now, when you think about smuggling oil, the first thing that comes to my mind is if you put it in your suitcase, it leaks, and you can't carry very many quantities. So who has the ability to transport large amounts of oil? The military. And this is the time of the Yuanhua case in Xiamen, where they had the whole customs system just wired. Any oil, any goods smuggled in had to go through this one mafia-like organization. Some customs boat didn't get the message. So it goes out to inspect a PLA ship. And the PLA ship shot him out of the water. Boom, no more boat. That's when Zhu Rongji and Jiang Zemin finally cracked down and said, okay, military, out of the smuggling business. Since we've seen a number of military officers cashiered lately, I suspect that problem hasn't been solved either, but at least they made a start at that time. A very dramatic moment that finally forces itself on the Politburo desk.
A few days ago, there was the Munich Security Conference. Many of us listened to the fastest speech delivered by J.D. Vance, and after him spoke Wang Li, the Chinese foreign minister. And if you only listened to the words, he seemed to be the adult in the room, talking about the rule of law in international relations. You said, it's a little bit Xi Jinping, like make China great again. Mm-hmm. What is the understanding of that law?
The laws that work for China are good laws. Those that don't, maybe they need to be revised or circumvented.
But to go back to that point, because we also have to talk about the international relations of China. In the times of Deng Xiaoping, China was proud to be not a threat to its neighbors. Now we see a conflict on an undefined border with India of more than 1,000 kilometers. We see the conflict with Philippines, with Vietnam, the violation of a ruling of an international court in the South China Sea. We see that they violated the international treaties for the basis of China, one country, two systems. They abolished it. Mm-hmm. So China is obviously not respecting the international law in these cases. What do you think is this also a part that has a lot of support inside the society of China?
My colleague just said, what's good for China is good for China. And that's what we now see everywhere. We see the double discussion, double moral in all these things. When it's good for China, it's good for China. So Mr. Duterte was just kidnapped, was not kidnapped, sorry. He was just
blackmailed.
And brought to the justice. But 1 year before, he was not more in power. He was a very favored guest in China. And Xi Jinping met Mr. Duterte in 2023. And why did he do it? Because Mr. Duterte was a good guy for China. What he did in Philippines, who cares? But what he did for China was very good, especially when he didn't recognize the arbitrage law for the South China Sea. And never forget, when we speak about Xi Jinping, the whole foreign policy started in 2000. Oh, sorry. sorry, please. The whole foreign policy started with Xi Jinping in 2013, everywhere. It was not the policy of Deng Xiaoping, who said, keep your light a little bit more dimmer. We're still not there that we can shine so brightly. And but that is not Xi Jinping's policy. And everything else, what he has done, there was another thing which I found very interesting. Now the Ukraine, and Xi Jinping is a very good friend of Mr. Putin, no doubt. He met Putin 46 times. That's really a number. China is now tomorrow, the big conference is tomorrow in Beijing, from Iran, Russia, and China. No else. But when it comes to international discussion about the Ukraine, China is on the very understanding for the situation of Ukraine. There is one famous ambassador called Liu Shaye. He was the ambassador in Paris for the Chinese, and he's the so-called wolf warrior. At that time when he was in Paris, he said we have to re-educate the Taiwanese. He said we have to look that the East European states and the Ukraine, the former Russian states or the Soviet states, they have no real sovereignty. But now the same guy who is being put from Xi Jinping in a new job, he is now responsible as a European emissary, a very important guy. He now tells all the European, we have to work together with you to fight this American way of suppressing the Ukraine at that time when America was very bad to the Ukraine. So you will see what officially said by Mr. Wang Yi, for example, and other people, have always to be seen, is it good for China and how can we use it as it's good for China? But China doesn't play this international role up to now, so it doesn't matter so much for us. But it's still, you should not, that's only what I think, we should not forget about this role, and that the Silk Road and everything else, what you have heard, so many things, is a thing which is just 10 years old, or 13 years exactly, from 2013 up to now. Especially also in South China Sea, where they put the artificial islands. And nobody cared about much. You have heard about it, but that's it. But now they are fully armed, and they are fully military bastions, military positions of China in the South China Sea.
Despite having sworn that the islands would not be militarized.
Yes, they said, they told that.
Law. Well, I think we've covered it. The law, when the law works for China, they follow it. And yes, Wang Yi is a very smooth operator, very much in the tradition of Zhou Enlai and the greats of Chinese foreign policy. But he will also, he can play the wolf warrior role when he needs to, wants to. So I think China is now kind of using both of these roles as it's needed from their point of view.
I go back again to the idea how this system get a form of acceptance within the Chinese population. The question of that, the foreign policy, was not our role, and this is not our agenda today to talk about foreign policy. My question is more focused on the question, is the new message, China is strong and powerful, China plays a role on the international stage that is comparable to the US. Is this part of the new legitimation that can substitute the old pure economic narrative that the Communist Party is bringing wealth to the people, because in a situation where there is a significant economic crisis, where you see young, well-educated Chinese not getting jobs or adequate jobs, where you see the real estate crisis and so on, that this can substitute the narrative and the legitimation from the Communist Party and Xi Jinping?
This is a very good question, very difficult to grapple with. For those people of my age, they were really, really poor when the reform started, and they have retired, not to great wealth, but to great comfort. And their kids are now well educated. I'm not talking about everybody, of course, but mostly urban China. So their understanding is generally pretty good. It's sort of the next generation or so where, you know, you have a variety of people, variety of responses, and this is where seeing how it plays out over the next few years is going to be quite interesting. You know, for instance, my students, they do not say anything nice about Xi Jinping. I'm shocked. You know, it's not that they hate him. They just don't care about him. They've become sort of indifferent to the leadership as long as it doesn't get in their face. Now, unfortunately, from their point of view, it does get in their face from time to time. As when you cut back, you can't watch YouTube and other things. You can't express yourself on social media the way you can when you're in the States. COVID, watch the results of COVID. I don't know what they are yet, but I think they're going to be really huge. Xi Jinping basically asked the Chinese population, different places, different times, for 3 years to not leave their apartment, not at least when without permission. And then, sort of one weekend, he said, do whatever you want, I'm done with this. And with some exaggeration, all of their grandmothers died the next week. It was just tragic. And everybody, again, urban China, knows that they refuse to import MMR vaccines from the United States. I'm not being nationalistic here, but I've been vaccinated several times, so I do have some appreciation that they work. You know, they made a nationalistic stand out of keeping people in their apartments, and then the result is, you made me stay off the streets for 3 years, and then you don't care? I think that's a very bad message to send out to people, and the propaganda department is usually better than that. So that's, you know, so you're really asking about, will this generation still love China in the same sort of way? And I think that's very much up in the air. Xi Jinping, as you've pointed out several times, really is powerful, except nobody in the population cares.
Is it right, Andre?
In a certain way, I can only speak for the time before. Oh, I'm sorry. I can only, yes, this is stupid. I can only speak for the time 4 years, up to 4 years ago, because then I left China and I'm now in semi-retirement, and it's always different if you're in Germany or if you're in China yourself. Up to the time when I was in China, I had the same experience that you said, that you speak to people, you have absolutely critical minds if you know these people and if they know you. And it's not strangers. The second thing is, I never experienced an overly bordered nationalism up to now. The danger, what I think could be one day when people are not more rich and things like that, that you can produce nationalist emotions and get people like this. But this I didn't really experience in China. I saw some sort against Japan and everything else, but not this sort of nationalism. Then we always underestimate the enormous amount of money and surveillance that is put in Chinese security. Security and development are the main items of Chinese policies. Security is every day, every time by the Politburo and everything else constantly managed. So China is a very, very big surveillance state, but it's so big that inside the surveillance you can still feel quite comfortable and don't think there's any big problems if you don't challenge or confront the authorities, and if this challenge or confrontation is not getting under their skin. There's a lot of challenges that people can speak openly in the internet. You can, everyone here who knows Weixin and can look it up, the Weixin, so the people are talking quite openly, they're discussing very openly, because they are not seen, I'm sorry for this, I have to do it away. So, because when they are not being seen by the security as an organized opposition which is dangerous for the government, they let these people talk. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's hundreds, it's 1,000, but it doesn't matter if it starts to become 10,000s. So this is something that there is a lot of experience in the thing. The second thing is the army. There is a lot of money going into the army. So who gets the money now in China? It's not the education. It's the army, it's security, and all these things which are going up 8%, 9%, and so on every time. And this has some effect. But, and that is the last comment to this, what Jürgen said, there is, China's development is huge, and it created a lot of material richness. Some people got more, some people less, but altogether you got a lot. You got a lot of infrastructure, you got a lot of traffic that you can use, and so on and so on. So the whole thing, China's development is up to now economically seen, and not from the personal case or from human rights case or other thing, is a success story. And this is reflecting. This doesn't make people love the Communist Party or Mr. Xi Jinping or something else, but it leaves them in a state which is not rebellious in a big way. But if there is a little sign of it, the government is clamping down immediately, from the religion up to others. And so we have to see China in a very complicated situation.
You know, we haven't touched on the word organization. And that's something that the Chinese Communist Party does extremely well. They are pervasive. If you were a college student, you have a banjiang, a class monitor, and you know, he can come over and say, Johnny, I saw your paper last week, and there are a couple of problems that we should talk about. You know, you're a very intelligent student, and we'd really like to give you that scholarship next year. But, you know, you got to be a little more careful on these things. And, you know, well, maybe you will be, maybe you won't be, but somebody has noticed that you've been talking to some people and maybe saying the wrong things and whatever. They're really, you know, modern. You know, you can have a lot of private conversations. I don't want to exaggerate it. But if you are consistently saying the wrong things, and I think that's how some of the army people get into trouble. They go out with their army buddies, they have a few shots of baijiu, and pretty soon they're saying what they think. Somebody's listening.
Thank you, you both. I tried my best to bring you into a controversy. I failed on that. Thank you for your attention today, and the last word has Axel Schneider.
Yes, thank you, three panelists, for coming to Göttingen today and sharing with us your insights on this very interesting question. I think we have learned first, or reconfirmed first, that the system in China is not very transparent. It's very hard to predict anything. I think that's something we can agree on. Second, I think what we have learned from discussion is that the situation in China is changing, in fact. In what ways, we don't know yet, but it is changing. Because China has moved into a position and into internally and externally that is different from the past. So it would be very interesting to continue observing how these things are developing. And I'm really looking forward to maybe talking about this again in 5 years from now. But now first join me in thanking the three panelists for coming in to Göttingen and sharing with us their insights. Thank you.